Hello, everyone. Welcome to Ivy Scholar's 8th seminar, marking our partnership between Joe Elliott's Catalyst Collective, which provides mentoring to unlock the next generation's connection to identity, purpose, and belonging, and my company, Ivy Scholars, which helps high school students build candidacy and apply to college. Joe, thank you again so much for inviting us. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the 8th in a series of monthly seminars to help both mentorship communities teach 12 to 18-year-olds about critical topics in higher education. We're going to go over those topics, but before we get there, a little bit about me. My name is Sasha Chop. I'm the CEO of our company, Ivy Scholars. We're a group of 20 mentors working with a few hundred students per year. We've helped about 3,500 students since I founded the company a decade ago after graduating from the Johns Hopkins University. Over 90% of our students are accepted to one of their reach schools, and 100% make one of their target schools. 10% of our revenue goes to our nonprofit Laurel Scholars, which works with low-income students from Texas, California, New York, New Jersey, as well as refugees from Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and Ukraine. I've got more exciting news to share with all of you about Laurel Scholars and the work we plan to do, helping a member of Catalyst Collective through the Laurel Scholars Scholarship. But let's talk about our journey for today. I want to tell you about building a strong college admissions profile, the candidacy or set of qualities that make a college admissions officer want to admit a student. I also want to talk about major strategic considerations. First-generation students whose parents and their parents before them have not attended a four-year college or university. Legacy students whose parents attended the same university that their child's applying to. And students who are in underrepresented minorities. In addition, we're going to be talking about the SAT and ACT standardized testing in terms of planning and strategy, as well as college essays, resumes, summer plans, picking the right major, and a college transition. We have so much to get through today, and I'm excited to share it with you. So let's jump in. There's this very simple pie chart I like to show all the new students at Ivy Scholars, and I hope it's very informative for everyone watching as well. When I reduce what admissions officers want to 4 constituent elements, I think it really splits into 4 even slices of a 25% pie chart. 25% great grades / class rank, which is a measure of how your grades fare compared to other students in your school. 25% test scores, meaning SAT or ACT standardized test scores. 25% profile in terms of the activities you participated in and the honors you won during your high school experience, all 4 years. Generally, this covers things like leadership, academic research, community service and volunteering. And finally, 25% essays, supplemental essays, and personal statements. You might notice there's a really uneven distribution of time compared to the distribution of merit for importance to admission. While you might spend 4 years building up your admissions profile, doing community service, leading in clubs, doing academic research, you'll notice that your test scores, well, those will probably only come from 1 to 3, maybe 4 maximum, 3-hour test periods. Similarly, your supplemental essays will probably be written in 4 to 12 weeks near the start of your senior year. It's interesting to think that those 4 to 12 weeks for writing essays or those 3 hours for taking an SAT or ACT can be just as impactful as everything you do to develop your profile during your 4 years of high school or all the grades you earn in all your classes. So I've got a bit more to share on that note. If we were to look at this from the opposite perspective, let's say from a university perspective, and draw from the common data set where universities publish information on what's important to them, you'll see the top 2 variables for all US universities are high school grades, both in college prep courses like AP, Advanced Placement, or IB, International Baccalaureate courses, as well as total grades. Now, it's important to note that while all universities consider grades important, grades are not a positive reason to admit at all universities. I'd say outside the top 100, for the other 2,000 some universities in the US that aren't ranked in the top 100, grades are a really great metric for admission. Students who get good grades are very likely to be admitted. But within the top 100, especially within the top 50, especially within the top 25, things get a lot more complicated. There's this whole holistic admissions process where you've got to build a profile instead of just having good grades and good test scores. This mystifies a lot of people, and it brings a ton of anxiety to students and parents every year. I'm hoping in this conversation, I can give you some insights so that you can approach the topic with confidence. Let's go a little deeper. So when we look at this scatter plot of students who are accepted to top-tier universities, you'll see a very clear correlation between students who are accepted, between acceptance and GPA and acceptance and a high SAT or ACT score. Most notably, you'll see that even though SATs and ACTs help a good bit, a higher GPA is by far the most impactful rubric. In addition to these two more obvious quantitative variables, it's important to also consider course difficulty. AP courses will be worth more than non-AP courses. Challenging courses like pre-calculus or AP statistics will be worth more than relatively easy courses like astronomy or flower arranging. Now, that's what happens in school, but let's talk about what happens outside of school. All top-tier universities want the same core things from their applicants. They want students to find a passion they can devote themselves to build on their past successes, to demonstrate competence in this area of interest, and then cumulatively, slowly but surely, create evidence that students will eventually be future leaders or luminaries in their field, that they're smart, that they have good leadership qualities, and that they've got a good heart and want to make the world a better place. While there's no right or wrong extracurriculars for admission, in general, if your extracurricular can't show one of those three things about you, how intelligent you are, how good you are with people, or your values and sense of morals, it's probably not going to be as impactful for university admissions officers because those are the metrics that really convince them that you're the right stuff for their university. My advice to students in general is to aim for activities that match their major. Certainly, pre-med students might want to do some shadowing, or engineering students might want to intern at an engineering firm, but also maintain some flexibility. It's not necessary for students to narrow their field of interest down tremendously during high school, as long as you're building competence in one rough subject area, like STEM or the humanities or the social sciences. It's okay to take some time to figure out what you really want to do in college and experiment with extracurriculars in high school. So I give this warning to a lot of parents every year, but unfortunately, every year I still meet some parents who end up like this mom and her son right here. So I think this is funny, but I mean for it to be taken seriously too. What I want you to take when you see this image is a parent who's exhausted and a child who's checked out. But both of them are really hardworking and really committed. These aren't lazy people. Instead, they've overworked themselves. The mom schlepping her kid to too many extracurriculars, and the kid trying to divide a limited amount of energy and attention among too many different sources. The point I want to make to all families is that this isn't a brilliant admission strategy. Throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks, basketball practice, hockey practice, wrestling practice, band practice, that's not required or expected by admissions officers. That's what people do when they don't have a plan. It's counterproductive because students could do so much better if they just focused on the things that really matter to them. My recommendation for students is to pick 2 to 4 activities throughout their time in high school that they really want to focus on. Outside of that, I'm sure you'll have some ancillary activities that you'll report on your college admissions paperwork. You can generally report up to 10, but it's really just 2 to 4 that are going to be impactful. I think students feeling like they need to succeed in every single way possible generally leads to more students not succeeding enough in any single way. But a bit more about optimizing your extracurriculars. When you're looking at extracurriculars, you should definitely consider what everybody thinks of, clubs you do in school. It's also worthwhile considering if you're involved in other pursuits, sports, music, theater, working a job, or volunteering, perhaps pursuing an entrepreneurial effort with a small business. It's also critical to make sure all these activities show passion, that there's a pattern of involvement in a single subject matter where students build both depth and breadth. Hopefully, this gives students a chance to show curiosity, that they want to learn more about their interests and build on that knowledge, as well as leadership, that they're not just passive observers in their own activities, but they really want to engage and engage others in those activities. Students, when you follow this advice, things come together. Participation in these extracurricular activities has a positive correlation to attendance, to high grades, and to earning a bachelor's degree from a 4-year accredited university. But you already knew that, I think. Instead, what I'd like to say is something you might not be aware of. Even on a purely quantitative level, where you are just looking at the metrics of SATs or ACTs, students who participate in extracurricular activities tend to do better than students who don't. Simply put, extracurricular activities show the best of your profile. They show your personality, your curiosity, your passion. They're the real reasons admissions officers will admit you. And honestly, if you are looking to develop a reason that you would feel you would deserve to be admitted, you'd probably find those answers in an extracurricular activity, not in something like a standardized test or in taking tests in class and getting good grades. So remember what I said, that for lots of universities outside the top 100, extracurriculars were not a major decision factor? You can see that accounted for right here above me. That's 44.3% of universities list extracurricular activities as of moderate importance. Now, if we were to break this down by university ranking, I think you'd see almost 100% of universities in the top 50, and probably about 85% of universities in the top 100, rank extracurricular activities as considerably important. But this metric's dragged down by all the universities outside the top 100 that don't think of extracurriculars as important. So the majority of universities care at least moderately about extracurriculars, but all the great universities care a lot about extracurriculars, generally even more so than class rank, having a good SAT or ACT score, because especially at top tier universities, those qualities are a given. So let's do some examples. Let's start with the University of Houston. You'll notice the extracurricular activities are only considered here, not important or very important. The only categories that meet those standards are secondary school rigor, class rank, and academic GPA. Basically, did you take card classes and did you score well? So this is a great example of a school that admits mostly on a quantitative basis. As long as you've got the SAT or ACT for the University of Houston, about 1300s or high 20s. And as long as you've got the grades, about a 3.6 to 3.8 on a 4.0 unweighted scale, UH wants you at their school. But what if we talk about Rice University? Rice University is a top 25 university. And like most highly selective universities, especially private ones, it values extracurriculars tremendously. It puts them in the very important category, along with character and personal qualities. While admissions officers at UH might just be looking at your transcript and your SAT or ACT score report, when Rice's admissions counselors get together, they're going to be combing through your extracurriculars, your essays, your interviews, and looking for that spark of life that would show them what kind of person you are on a human level. So when I say that quantitative variables get less important as universities get more competitive, I don't mean that GPA, getting good grades, or getting good test scores isn't valuable. They still are. But Rice is going to have so many students with SATs in the 1500s or ACTs in the mid-30s with GPAs above 3.9 on a 4.0 unweighted scale that they must use extracurricular activities and character or personal qualities to differentiate between who they really want at their school and who's going to have to go elsewhere. So now that we've compared the difference between these two schools, let's talk a little bit about communicating with universities. That's via a program called the Common App, which can be found at commonapp.org. This is the website that is used by the vast majority of private universities in the US to submit college application paperwork. Texas residents, notably, you might still use another portal called Apply Texas, which is for public universities in Texas. Similarly, guys, if you live in California, your state will have a system called Apply California, used only for UC systems. But whichever application portal you're using, the same truths hold. Your job is to fill out a really great activities list. Pick your most impressive activity, describe its length and depth of involvement, and stick it right there at the top. And then, in descending order, go from most important to least important in your activities list, grouping similar ones together. I advise students to use active verbs here, like utilized, or encouraged, or engaged, or accomplished. I think it's really important to be able to convey in 8 to 12 words what exactly you did in simple terms. Most of the time, admissions officers have very little time to read activity sections, so it's important students are pithy and to the point. Now, while I don't encourage students to abandon grammatical conventions entirely, it is okay to abbreviate or otherwise simplify sentences in order to fit them into the character limit here. Finally, I want to make a note that in addition to writing your activities section about the things you've done, you'll also be writing your honors section about the awards you've won. In general, these will be related. Very often, students will, for example, participate in a math and science competition, and then win a math and science honor, and they'll list both on their activities list. My recommendation in general is to start from most important to least important, but for those students who have really, really full resumes, it can sometimes be helpful to have entirely different honors sections from your activities section to make sure you show a breadth of different forms of involvement. Now, let's talk more about making sure your activities section is the best it can be. With regard to good extracurricular activities, they involve longitudinal participation, meaning they take a while. I think 2 years is a good gold standard for an extracurricular activity. Anything below 6 months often has trouble being taken seriously. Admissions counselors also want to know how recently you're involved. Ideally, all the first 5 items on your activities list will be ones you participated in 11th and 12th grade, ideally ones you're still participating in while you're doing the college application process. The Common App will ask for the number of hours per week you invested in the activity, so depth of participation is something that you can state easily, clearly, and quantitatively. Now, these next ones are a little more abstract, but I think they're even more important. Initiative means not just founding a club, but coming up with ideas that other people didn't, seeing a problem that other people were content to let slide and making something of it. Understanding your circumstances and doing what's necessary to change them. I think a lot of students underestimate the importance of demonstrating initiative in college applications, and it can sound tricky at first, but to tell the truth, I think most students often undervalue their ability to contribute. When I was in high school, I remember walking out of a club meeting where I felt like I had something useful to say, but I didn't want to speak up and sound dumb. When I talked to my friends afterwards, it turned out 5 of us were all thinking the exact same thing, but everyone was scared to be the first person to speak up. Guys, I encourage you, don't repeat our mistakes. Be the first one to speak up. Certainly, bringing up an important topic and a solution or a way to address a problem that you think could be useful will always win your respect, even if it doesn't end up being the solution everyone goes with. Guys, a few more qualities when it comes to picking extracurriculars. Achievement, you want to be able to demonstrate impact and growth. It can be helpful to do this either with a trophy or with a number in terms of placement. For example, the top 4 out of 500 debaters in the nation, or out of the 750 students in the tournament, you are rated in the top 50. Being able to give admissions officers clear numbers as to exactly where you stand vis-a-vis the rest of the applicant pool and the rest of your competitors makes their job easier. Authenticity, creativity, strategic value, and cohesion. In other words, is the activity real? My hope is most students listening to this won't have this problem, but guys, if you are considering, for example, pursuing a major that you're not really interested in because you think it'll be easier to get into a university like that, or doing an activity, a sport, a musical instrument, an academic competition, that to be honest, you don't really like and aren't really passionate about, but you feel like people expect it of you, my advice is to drop it. The truth is that the only way you really get amazing results out of yourself is to do the stuff that is right for you. If the activities you're doing now don't feel authentic, I think it would be a mistake to stick it out any further. I think in contrast, it's important for students to move on, learn what doesn't suit them, and keep an active search for activities that do. A big part of our job at Ivy Scholars is making sure all of our students cycle through enough extracurriculars to find the things that are really their home. When it comes to creativity, I think this is really difficult to define in the abstract. I'll remind you, though, that most admissions officers are learning about your creativity through the lens of college admissions essays. Whatever creativity you're expressing needs to be something that can be communicated in a 400 to 650 word essay. The same should be obvious for strategic value. Students who want to go into STEM, for example, would be well served to take engineering or science classes, as well as engineering or science extracurriculars. It's okay to have some come out of left field, but at least your main, let's say, top 5 activities ought to roughly align with your major. Now, if I were to rank extracurricular activities, let's say into 4 tiers, here's how I'd sort this out. A top tier extracurricular win would be something like a national or global award, or being in the best of your field, or founding an organization that scales to a large number of people, or getting into a really competitive program, like something with below a 10% admit rate. You can see some examples of this on the PowerPoint. In the bottom left corner, you'll note RSI, Research Science Institute, MITES, the math program at MIT, and TASP are all some of the more competitive summer programs available for students. Students accepted these summer programs give university officers a green flag that they have the right stuff intellectually and personally. So it makes it a little easier to be accepted to a top-tier university once you've already been accepted to a top-tier summer program. But maybe you're not quite there. If I were to define the difference between, say, tier 2 and tier 3, I'd say it'd be the difference between something like winning a state or regional level or placing near the finals but not winning something on a bigger scale. Being the first or the top in your area can get you a lot of trust, a lot of respect, and a lot of admiration from admissions officers. The same is true with organized activities. If you're president of a big recognized club, like Model UN, or the debate team, or the soccer team, that'll probably get you further than a non-presidential position, especially in clubs that might be less recognized, like the anime club or the chess club. In short, the point I want to make is that the more you can give admissions officers a sense of how hard you had to work in order to achieve what you did, the easier it is for them to advocate for you in committee as to why you're a great fit for their program. Now, specifically, in order to arm them with the best characteristics to advocate for you, I advise demonstrating breadth. Freshman year, it's just fine to explore multiple clubs, areas of interest, but by junior year, you should start focusing down and reducing the number of clubs and extracurricular activities you're participating in. And then by the end of 11th, beginning of 12th grade, you'll need to decide if you either want to move into a presidential position on your own in a pre-existing club, or create your own organization, which you might found and lead. Either way, it's your job to make sure as a student that you get to demonstrate your leadership abilities and that you've got evidence of these abilities. I think the yearbook club can be really fantastic for this. It's wonderful to have chroniclers who are there along with you for the high school journey, who want to see everything you're seeing and make sure that the work you do is recognized. When we look at extracurriculars on a national level and break it down by demographics, you'll see by far the biggest participation levels are found in athletic activities and religious instruction, with a slight tailing from music, dance, or art lessons. Less than half of all students have a part-time job or participate in an organization like Boy Scouting, for example, but I think these are often some of the most impactful forms of extracurriculars. One of my concerns that I share with students every year is that participation in sports, religious instruction, music, dance, and art are really awesome for character development, but don't necessarily tell admissions officers a lot about who you are personally. I think it's important to focus on achievement-based activities, especially intellectual achievement-based activities, or leadership activities that show admissions officers how you react to challenges and adversity. Breaking down extracurricular participation rates by ethnicity, you'll see that Asian students, the most overrepresented minority in higher education in the US, pull slightly ahead of white students, who pull slightly ahead of Native American Latino students, who pull slightly ahead of Black students. It might be said that participation levels in extracurriculars are correlated pretty directly with the average family income from an ethnic demographic group. I'd say this would be accurate. So when you're compared with other students who are applying to universities, there are times you'll be compared to other students in your ethnic group. Now, this is not always the case. If you've been listening to the news recently, you'll be aware of a Supreme Court decision making a Harvard lawsuit last summer, which attempted to reduce the role of race-based decision-making in college admissions. While I think this is a wonderful kind of neutrality to work towards, I think the reality for the coming years is that students who come from traditionally higher SES demographic backgrounds, like white students and Asian students, are generally expected to have more activities and to demonstrate excellence in more activities than students belonging to Black, Latino, or Native American subdemographics. So we started talking about admission strategy, and I've got a lot more to share. Let's talk about first-generation students. Most universities really want to support students whose parents or their parents or their parents didn't attend universities. In fact, most schools will have specific programs to recruit first-generation students. Not only will these students be given extra consideration in admission, a greater chance of admission, given that they have fewer resources to build their academic profile and less of family experience to draw on when developing themselves as students, but these programs will generally also involve students networking or visiting the university in person. I think one of the best things about these programs is that they'll take students who otherwise might not have considered a four-year higher education degree and give them a sense of the reality, the opportunity of that this degree presents to them, and give them a bit of hope and clarity on what they need to do in the admit process to be a serious contender for those degrees. Sadly, though, the vast majority of first-generation students whose parents didn't go to university struggle within university settings. While many students do end up getting great grades and getting their degree, it's indisputable that university programs to support first-generation students do something wonderful, but don't do enough to bring those students up to parity with other students who are not first-generation status. Now, an analogous concern exists with minority students. While the Supreme Court says colleges can't directly consider race admission, many universities want to promote diversity, and they'll ask questions about diversity. This is your chance to talk about anything else you can bring to the university that doesn't relate directly to an ethnic background. Things like different life perspectives, habits and customs, food, dance, cuisine, rituals, as well as a different paradigm or style of thought, all excite universities that want to make sure their student body is diverse and interesting, not filled with people who are pretty similar to each other. Now, we've got an opposite challenge when it comes to legacy status. See, legacy students are like the opposite of first-generation students in that their parents went not just to a four-year university, but to that specific university they're also applying to. legacy students get a pretty substantial boost, between 3 to 5x their admissions chances. This can be huge, but it's no guarantee of acceptance. There's still plenty of legacy students rejected every year. Even still, for universities that are willing to recognize legacy admission, the difference in admit rates can be massive. Now, there's some sampling bias here. Students whose parents went to Harvard are a lot more likely than the average student to have high academic merit, but even with that higher academic merit on average, these students have a leg up somewhere like Harvard. You'll note that about 30% of Harvard students are legacies, even though the admit rate is just under 4%. Legacy is something you can't do anything about, and I'm going to turn to a topic you can do something about: standardized testing. SATs and ACTs are on their way back, and I hope after you listen to this, you won't be caught at the pearly gates with St. Peter telling you that you should have gotten another 10 points. So the era of test optional started during the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic, in which students were often unable to make it to testing centers. This era is over. Most schools are reinstating SAT and ACT requirements for students entering the graduating class of 2025, and even more schools are going to enter this for 2026 and 2027. The vast majority of top schools have committed towards ending test optional admission and moving back towards test mandatory admission. My advice to all students is, if you were hoping you would be able to skip the hard part and go test optional, I think unless you're applying this year, that option won't be available to you by the time you're doing your application year. Instead, it's my advice to settle yourself in and prepare to study for a challenging but ultimately winnable test, the SAT or the ACT. So the reason for this is that SATs and ACTs can help universities compare students to each other, so that even when schools have different criteria for who might get a good grade or who might win an extracurricular competition, the SATs or ACTs provide an objective metric. The good news here is you've got all the free prep materials you could need. Khan Academy, as well as collegeboard.org, both provide between 2 to 6 free practice tests each. These only require registration for an account. You don't have to pay anything, and I highly encourage all Ivy Scholar students and anyone listening to this to take a look at both collegeboard.org and Khan Academy. Now, there are some schools that occupy a kind of middle ground called test flexible. This is schools that don't require just the SAT or ACT. They're also willing to take some more specific tests, namely AP advanced placement tests, those taken at the end of each year of high school for specific subjects like AP English or AP Calculus or AP Physics, as well as international baccalaureate scores, which are similarly broken down by different types of courses, like maths or psychology. I don't think this is going to be a terribly popular policy going into the future, but at least for now, Yale, and to a lesser extent Duke, have had a habit of considering other tests, namely the APs or the IBs, in addition to the SATs or ACTs. I think it's worthwhile only for students who have strong subject-specific knowledge but don't do well on general standardized testing, especially students who aren't very good at test-taking tricks and are better at the content of the tests, to submit APs or IBs rather than ACTs or SATs. I also advise all our students not to bet on this, because most students won't accept AP or IB scores for admissions purposes. While they might accept them later once you're accepted to the university, they still want to see your SAT or ACT in order to admit you. When you're planning out test taking, my advice is this. First, grab a free diagnostic from ACT.org and collegeboard.org or Khan Academy. Take both tests under testing conditions, quietly, using an egg timer so your phone doesn't distract you, away from any sources of noise, without any snacks, and just a bottle of water to drink. I would advise students to start doing this diagnostic testing process either the fall of their sophomore year or once they have completed their second semester of Algebra 2, whichever comes first. My hope is students can start studying in sophomore year, compete for national merit in the fall of junior year, and use the national merit exam, scored out of 1520 instead of 1600, to gauge if they're really ready to hit their benchmark score for the the real SAT. My advice to students is not to take the test more than 4 times. While it's okay to show steady incremental improvement, you don't want to give admissions officers the impression that you're struggling or working really, really hard to just eke out 1 more point. It's also important to note that final testing dates are November, December of student senior year, but most students who are applying on the early round, the ones due November 1st, need to finish their activity by their SATs or ACTs by October at the latest. And even that's cutting it close. When it comes to deciding between the SAT and the ACT, Their length of time is almost the same, and they cover a great deal of the same content. But the SAT vocabulary is a little more complex. The ACT demands you go a little faster because there's a few more questions. The ACT involves a couple math concepts like logarithms or matrices that you'd cover in Algebra 2, but you probably won't touch again. The SAT, in contrast, involves at least a little bit of pre-calculus, some trigonometric identities, and lots of triangle properties. It's also important to note the ACT science section is not about what you've learned in science class. It's about your ability to interpret data from scientific charts, graphs, or slides. Students don't need to worry about coming in with pre-existing knowledge of biology, physics, chemistry, environmental science. All you need to be able to do is interpret the information given to you on the ACT science section and report on your findings. Now, the SAT's already shifted to a digital format, and this looks to be the future of testing for pretty much everybody. You can see the new format here, basically broken down into slightly longer than a half-hour segments with 22 to 27 questions per segment. It's also important to note that on this digital SAT, you've got to bring your own electronic device, your own laptop, your own tablet. You'll be using an app created by College Board called Blue Book. You'll still be testing in a testing center, so no doing it remotely at home. You've got staggered start times, so all students start on the same real time across the globe, whether you're in the East Coast or Central Time or Mountain Time or Pacific Time. It's also really critical for students to know what adaptive testing means. This means that the SAT is looking at how many questions you got right, and if you're getting enough questions right in the first section, the SAT will unlock a second, more challenging section for you. Doing well in that section is the only way to get a perfect score. Students who don't get the first few questions right will be given easier questions worth fewer points and ultimately will result in a lower SAT score. So nothing you didn't know already, but yeah, if you want to do well in the SAT, you've got to ace it from the first question. My final point to make here is that there's a pretty cool change for students now. The SAT can be scored very quickly. So instead of waiting a week or even a month to get your SAT results back, you might get them back as quick as 24 to 48 hours. Now, I emphasize the SATs so much because they're becoming the preferred choice. The SATs gained market share relative to the ACT in recent years. I don't think either test is easier, and the SAT is technically 5 minutes longer. It tends to favor more students who do better at math, and the ACT tends to favor students who do better at English. But then the SAT also favors students who've got a more elaborate vocabulary, and the ACT generally favors students who can read more short, simple passages quicker. I think it's a toss-up conceptually which one is best for which types of students, which is why I encourage all the students I see to take the tests for themselves so they can see what their scores are. In general, wealthier and more populous states like California or Texas or New York favor the SAT. More rural states, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Nevada, will favor the ACT. Most top-tier universities like the SAT as well, or at least have more students submitting an SAT, but they'll all still accept ACTs, so this doesn't need to be a decision factor. Ultimately, you should take the test that you do best at. Now, once you get back your standardized testing scores, I want you to look not just at the raw score you were given, but also relative to a universal percentile distribution. Students who are above the median, the 50th percentile mark, become an attractive applicant, but the median is different at each school. Schools, instead of publishing a single median, will generally publish an interquartile range. They'll say that 25% of students scored above this SAT score, and 75% of students scored at least this SAT score. So they'll give you a middle band between the 25th to 75th percentile, often called the interquartile range. Students who are in the first band of the interquartile range, between the 0 to 25% mark, generally have a really tough time getting admitted. Students in the second quartile, between 25th and 50th percentile mark, generally have an okay time getting admitted if they've got a persuasive essay, good grades, and nice letters of recommendation. Students who are in the third quartile, between the 50th and 75th percentile, generally do well. And students who are in the final quartile generally have to do something wrong or have something missing from their application to not be admitted to the universities they're applying to. That being said, these scores are no guarantees of admission, and there are perfect scorers turned away from Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford every year. So you'll note some data here regarding what to do if you're in the second quartile between 25th and 50th percentile. And the answer is basically, that underrepresented minorities ought to consider submitting weak but not terrible SAT scores that are less than average but better than the 25th percentile. But overrepresented minorities, which is to say Asians, as well as white students, should generally not submit SAT scores if they are lower than the 50th percentile. The chart on the right shows you, when you zoom in on the data, you'll see Black and to a lesser degree Hispanic students have 2 to 5 times the added chances of white or Asian applicants when you're controlling for the top performing students that Harvard wants the most. But at the left, for the lower academic deciles, almost nobody gets accepted. And in the middle, you'll see that about 25% of Black students would be considered in an environment where only about 4 to 8% of white or Asian students would be. In other words, universities are more willing to be flexible on test scores when it comes to underrepresented minorities like Black, Hispanic, or Native American students. Another consideration is component versus composite scores. Composite scores are the total score from all the sections you took on the SAT, that's going to be critical reading and mathematics. On the ACT, that'll be English, reading, math, and science. In all cases, I strongly encourage students to make sure their math is above the 50th percentile mark and their English is at least at the 25th percentile mark, if not the 50th percentile mark. Remember, even English majors need good math SATs or ACTs. And even STEM-focused schools like MIT or Caltech that want to admit students for jobs that are quantitatively focused, like engineering, still want to make sure they've got good communication skills. So it's important to look at each of your component scores, which is to say your scores in English, reading, science, and mathematics, or just critical reading and mathematics on the SAT, to understand how you'll appear to university admissions officers. Don't trust the composite, break it down to the components. So to give you some benchmarks where we stand with these numbers, I've given you some interquartile ranges for common universities in Texas. A&M's about 1170 to 1380. UT Austin is about 1230 to 1480. SMU, Southern Methodist University, is about 1360 to 1490. And Rice is about 1490 to 1570. From all of this, I encourage you to conclude something pretty straightforward. Universities can be ranked in a rough order of competitiveness by their interquartile ranges. So Rice would be more competitive than UT Austin, which would be more competitive than, which would be around as competitive as SMU, which would be more competitive than Texas A&M. We've talked a lot about standardized testing, and now I want to do a little bit to help decipher what we mean by holistic admission. I love this joke here, basically that admissions officers decipher hieroglyphics or go through some odd series of logical syllogisms that seem to involve, I believe that's the quadratic formula. I don't think admissions actually needs to be this complicated. Let's talk about what you need to do so admissions officers won't be puzzling over your application like this. In junior year, ideally the second semester of junior year, meaning January, February, it's a great time to start brainstorming your essays. Talk about them with your parents, with your English teachers, with other trusted adults. Keep in mind, most university prompts rarely change, although universities technically have the right to change their prompts as late as August. So I think the summer is a really fantastic time for students to start writing essays. While doing this, you've got a challenge to balance authenticity, creativity, and your desire to impress. There's another wonderful joke here. The bane of every college applicant, the admissions essay. You'll see a couple of far side looking characters reading. Who is your favorite grim fairy tale character, and how would being that character help your career? I don't know how to answer that one either, guys, and I've been doing college admission for 10 years, but I can tell you what some real and important essay topics can be. Why do you want to study your major? Why do you want to come to this university specifically? What are your leadership skills? How are you diverse, or can you bring some difference in perspective? How do you interact with your community? Tell us about your extracurriculars. And then one zany off-the-wall question, maybe a little bit like being a fairy tale character from Wizard of Oz or something like that. In each of these cases, I encourage students to start with a simple, straightforward question. Brainstorm clear experiences that produce nice, simple anecdotes that can be used to answer each question, and consider which universities will end up asking the same questions for the same topics in different ways. You'll find lots of universities will have different phrasings, but fundamentally the same message for questions like, why do you want to study this major you picked? It's just fine in this case to recycle those essays, reusing the same prose, as long as you change structure, word count, and of course, the name of the university in the essay. In corollary, you'll need to craft a great resume. Over the last decade, I've seen lots of teenage CEOs, Nobel Prize hopefuls, and Olympic-level artists in lots of applicant pools. And I'll say that resume inflation is rarely as persuasive to admissions officers as it is to high school students. My advice for making sure your resume is as optimized as possible is to follow a simple and clean format, avoid being 100 pages, like the example of the cartoon above, and to make sure you're including basic, compelling data. What school did you go to? What are your grades? When do you graduate? What are your relevant coursework, extracurricular activities, and awards? I think it's also worthwhile for students to list their skills, both soft skills and hard skills, being multilingual, for example, can be a pretty cool thing to report summer before college. Well, it's both time to relax and time to prepare. I encourage you to spend some time considering either working to save money, studying in advance to make sure you're ready for college classes, as well as reaching out to future roommates to coordinate who's bringing what and get ready to coexist in a relatively small couple 100 square foot dorm room for the next year. And make sure that the students you're leaving behind, current 11th graders who will be rising into 12th grade, are ready to take up the mantle of leadership from you in any clubs you run. I think a wonderful thing students can do is to leave a legacy project behind so future students in their schools know how to handle these same organizations these students who graduate might have developed but are no longer around to coach on. The more advice you can lead in terms of protocols, examples, templates, as well as coaching, the better off the students you're leaving behind in your high school will be, and also the better you'll look to universities as a leader. When it comes to picking a major, my advice is this. Most universities will let you change your major, so you should probably pick something that you think you're pretty interested in, but not worry about finding something you're going to do for the rest of your life. But some universities, and especially some majors, require a lot more work than others. Specifically, if you want to study computer science or business, finance, economics, my advice is to look carefully at each university you're applying to and ask yourself, is this the kind of major I could transfer into or out of if I wanted to, or would I be locked into this program? Most universities, as well as college admissions officers, will be happy to disclose this. They certainly don't want you to have any surprises once you're accepted. I think it's especially important for students who don't quite know what they want to do yet, who are still figuring themselves out, to enroll in universities that offer a flexible change of major policy. I'd only encourage students to apply to inflexible universities if they're really sure that they know what they want to study. When students are transitioning between college and high school, it's time to do a little forethought. Fill out housing paperwork, prepare everything you're going to need, contact your roommates in advance. Ideally, get a meal plan. It's nice to not have to cook for yourself every day, especially when you're a freshman in college. Consider transportation. Some areas, especially Houston, you'll probably be bringing your own car. Others, especially New York, Boston, Baltimore, probably not. Logistics are also important to consider. This might be your first time booking your own flights, packing your own luggage. I encourage you as a high school student to get used to it because it's something you'll be doing the rest of your life. Finally, I think it's a nice treat for parents who have one last chance to work with their children on logistics right before dorms open, so that they've got one last chance to collaborate. And maybe these teenagers start to see that their parents were a little wiser than they seemed at first. Some other things for students to do when transitioning universities. Look at student groups, labs, research projects, and courses. In other words, build yourself a landing pad. Figure out what it is you want to do once you're on campus. In general, my recommendation is to attend classes first, students group second, and then labs, research projects, and on-campus jobs third. Once accepted to undergrad, it's time to start considering your next steps. Grad school often is a big option, and 14% of Harvard graduates are going to go to a full-time grad professional school. But there's definitely other popular career paths too. For top-tier universities, you'll see lots of students who want to go into financial services, technology or engineering, or consulting. Maybe go to your university's career services department and ask them what their acceptance rates look like for students in different majors or programs within those fields. It's always useful to start talking to your career center in sophomore or junior year, so you've got time to build the context and knowledge of what people in your industry are going to want to see from you by the time you're a senior and you need to graduate. But here's a rough blueprint. Students in college should pick coursework that's relevant to their major, maintain a high GPA, network in their field, pursue related student activities both on campus and in the summer, and look for jobs, internships, research or lab positions on their campus. Now, I want to take a break from talking about admissions strategy to talk a little bit about alternate summer activities. Basically, if you're a freshman, sophomore, or junior, someone who's not applying to college this year, and you haven't yet applied for a summer program, it's still not too late to either work in a paid job to save money for college expenses, intern at an organization, volunteer locally, do an independent research project, or build a legacy project, building up the kind of organization you started so that future students will be able to make even better use of it. Lots of students work at local businesses, volunteer, do independent research, take summer courses, or art or athletic programs. Now, I want to be specific about research. In general, research, the act of looking into an academic topic and then drawing a novel conclusion, is the peak of academia. Unlike high school, where your high school teachers are hired mostly to be there and teach you, teaching is really a side gig for your professors at college. 100% of your professors, postdocs, and PhDs, their real job is to create new knowledge, is to discover new knowledge in their fields and then publish on it. This isn't restricted to people who graduated from grad school or have a doctor before their name. There's over 20 journals that exist to publish research from high school students, and top universities, especially Yale, Columbia, Brown, Harvard, really love seeing the students who do publish research. For students who are interested, I've got this wonderful list on the right-hand side of the screen. There are opportunities to do research in behavioral and social sciences, technology, engineering, mathematics, medicine, the humanities, even poetry and prose, as well as economics and business. Whatever your set of interests are, there's probably a set of journals out there that would support them. So if you want to be an economics major or a finance major, doing a paper on that topic, looking into a topic independently, and then finding one of these like the Journal of Emerging Investigators or the Concord Review to publish the knowledge you've accumulated can do a lot towards showing admissions officers that you're a very serious candidate. Specifically, when you're doing research, you'll want to understand the impact factor of a journal. In other words, how many people cite that journal per year. You generally want this number to be something between 2 and 7, even though it stretches from 0.001 to up to 70. An impact factor of 2 to 7 means a couple hundred to a couple thousand people cite the journal you're publishing in per year. I think this is a great number because any less than that, your journal might not be taken seriously. But any more than that, and the work you're doing might be displaced by other more senior scientists who've had more time to work on their research, refine it, and publish it. Lots of high school journals don't have an impact factor in general, and I think that's fine. They're a wonderful stop for lots of students, but students who want to go to really competitive programs, especially Ivy Leagues, ought to at least consider if they can get an impact ranking for the journal in which they're publishing to show the seriousness of their academic pursuit to university admissions officers. Now, when you're building a research project, you've got 4 big steps. You need to find a good question, something that hasn't been asked before, something that's narrow enough for you to investigate, not a broad question that might be answered in multiple different ways. Once you've identified a really good question and narrowed it down to something that's very simple and clear, you'll want to gather data, either from federally available data sets, or from private data companies that will sell it, or from publicly available data sets. Wherever you get it, your job is to find these hard numbers for you to analyze and then perform analysis on, determine what that data means in relation to the research question you asked. Once you finish that, you're at the presentation stage. Your job is to share your results with others to add to the store of global knowledge. Now, this is pretty hard, and I think it gets a lot easier with the right mentor. Part of my job at Ivy Scholars is connecting students with wonderful mentors who can help them research in topics varying from data analytics to neurology, to psychology, to ecology, to biology, genetics, to economics. If you're interested in doing something like a research project, Ivy Scholars can help you with everything from ideating a really good research question, to sourcing and validating the data that you're going to perform analysis on, to identifying publication venues, performing the research and doing the analysis you'll need to turn the data into something that speaks towards your conclusions, reviewing and editing your paper, and finally, submitting it to journals and having them accept you. In other words, it's a good idea to find a mentor who can help you with research. It's a complex process, but if you do it right, the rewards are pretty massive. Now, before I close out for the day, there's something I want to share with all of you. It's very special to me personally. Ivy Scholars is holding a Laurel Scholars Scholarship. This is a free scholarship in which students receive over $20,000 of Ivy Scholars services. 1 hour a month of college admissions counseling from August 2024 until the August of their senior year, and 2 hours per month of college admissions coaching from September through March of their senior year. This is open for all high school students, freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior, and the deadline to apply is July 31st of 2024. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like everyone to take a moment and scan that QR code in the bottom right corner of your screen, or use that link on the left-hand side of the screen, ivscholars.com/Laurel Scholars. If you know a deserving young person who you think could benefit from a really great educational opportunity, free consulting that normally goes for over $20,000, I think you might be doing them a tremendous service to nominate them, to connect them with Ivy Scholars, and to give them a chance to receive a really, really amazing college education. Ivy Scholars program offers everything our standard program does, covering candidacy building, making sure students have great evidence of intellectual achievement, of leadership, and of desire to do good community service, test preparation for the SAT and ACT, college planning and essay advising, interview prep, and prep for the college transition. My goal is to find talented, smart students who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford our help and make sure their talents and hard work are recognized. And to brag a little bit, Ivy Scholars students have earned literal millions of dollars at top universities, including Harvard, Yale, MIT, Princeton, Stanford, Caltech, Brown, Columbia, Dartmouth, UCLA, and UC Berkeley. And that is just scratching the surface. So that's the end of my presentation for today, and thank you so much for joining us. The next presentation is going to be held August of 2024, and Catalyst is going to send out a newsletter informing everyone of the exact date and time, along with a link. In the meantime, if anyone feels they need help with anything Ivy Scholars might be good at, the candidacy building college application test prep process, I encourage you to reach out. You can either call or email me at the phone number or email on the left-hand side of the screen, or use the QR code in the bottom left-hand side of the screen to schedule a free consultation, which I'll meet with you and your child and talk through what Ivy Scholars can do for you. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for your time and attention. It's been my pleasure.